Portland, Oregon is a unique place to live, to say the least. And if you're thinking about moving to Portland in 2025, in this video, we're going to talk about everything you need to know. Stay tuned to learn more. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Paul Clem from the Oregon Relocation Team coming to you from Forest Park. And in this video, we're going to talk about everything you need to know when it comes to moving to Portland, Oregon in 2025. From where to what to how and everything in between. Now, if this is your first time to the channel or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. So last year, I moved myself from Southwest Portland to Northwest Portland up right near Forest Park. And Forest Park is this big, enormous park right in the heart of Portland. Tons, miles and miles of hiking trails, beautiful scenery, and I figured might as well go out and take a walk here. I haven't really explored Forest Park much since I've lived nearby, so I decided to throw on the hiking boots today and figured we'd step out here and talk about, again, everything you would need to know or consider when it comes to moving to Portland this year. Now, most of who we work with are people relocating to Portland and the metro area from out of state. So that in and of itself is a tall order. There's a lot to know when it comes to moving to a new area, whether you've spent some time in Portland or, like a lot of our clients, haven't been here at all. So, you know, when it comes to where to live, what the economy's like, the cost of living, what are you going to do for fun, schools, you know, what are going to be the big things to consider. There's a lot to know, and whether you're starting at square one or you've started to do a little bit of the legwork, we're going to talk about it in this video. And we've helped so many people relocate to Portland and to the metro area. And if you want to talk more about the topics in this video or the real estate market, whatever it may be, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. Schedule a Zoom call with us and we can talk more about it. First things first, where are you going to live in Portland or in the metro area? There is a ton to consider here because obviously Portland being kind of a mid-sized major city, you know, you have a proper urban downtown setting that you can live in. So, you know, there's old historic neighborhoods, there's true city living, there's a lot of kind of that, you know, urban setting that you can get and a lot of really good opportunities there. But, you know, Portland and the metro area is pretty big and pretty sprawled. Even within Portland and within its city limits, you can get a little, you know, a little bit of a quieter environment, a little more laid back, a little more of kind of a, you know, again, a suburban feel, but still in Portland. And then of course you have the suburbs in Portland. So I think for most people, you know, the biggest question, whether you know it or not, you know, moving to Portland is, do you want to be in the city, close to the city, and have some of those, you know, urban amenities like walkability, coffee shops, things like that? Or do you prefer to be in a more suburban setting, whether that be, you know, because it's quieter, because you think it's better, you know, for kids, for families, etc. There's a pretty clear distinction in the Portland metro area, again, being in the city or being in the suburbs. Now, when you look at the suburbs in Portland, you have Portland proper, and then you have suburbs surrounding Portland on all sides. And then there's kind of a second outer layer of suburbs as well that, you know, are going to be a little bit further out, a little bit newer in a lot of cases, and we'll talk more about that. But you have basically kind of close in suburbs, call it 15 to maybe 20 minutes getting into Portland. And then some of these outer-lying suburbs that are going to be 25, 30, 35, 40 minutes potentially getting into the city. Now, I think anywhere you live in Portland or in the metro area, you're going to have some relative accessibility and be able to get into Portland and into the city pretty easily and quickly enough. So, you know, I think for a lot of people, it's not necessarily the top consideration of whether you want to be in the city or not necessarily. I think for most people, it's the setting. You know, whatever's going to fit their lifestyle, whatever's going to fit what they're envisioning aesthetically. You know, I think for Portland and the metro area, you can get a lot of places where you have, you know, nice dense forests, a lot of trees, a lot of greenery like this. You can get areas that have a lot of like deciduous trees, and it doesn't really have the same quite the same feel necessarily. You can get areas that have a lot of rolling hills, and you can get a lot of areas that are really flat too. So, you know, just speaking broadly, broadly in terms of the aesthetic of where you would be, I think a lot of people have their preferences, again, in terms of what they might be envisioning, and there are plenty of options, whether you are close to the city or not. You know, following that point too, on whether or not you would want to be in an urban or a suburban setting, is being in an older or a newer area. I mean, you can get old homes in new areas and new homes in old areas, you know, and some of the nicest areas in all of the metro area are super old neighborhoods, like 100-year-old neighborhoods. And, you know, there's more newly built areas that, you know, are nice enough, but I don't think people would consider them to be the nicest areas necessarily of Portland. So there's kind of a mix of everything in between. But for the sake of where you're going to end up, there's going to be older areas that are very established. There's going to be newer areas that are still developing. And some of that comes down to as well, what type of home you want to be in. Do you want to be in a new construction? Do you want to be in an old historic home? There's a lot of mid-century developments around Portland and in the metro area. So, you know, I think, again, really the point being here is to illustrate the number of options that you have, but there might be some trade-offs, you know, depending on the type of home or area you want to be in. That might, you know, mean your proximity to some of the things you want to be near, you know, it isn't quite as close, or vice versa. The type of home you're envisioning or neighborhood you're envisioning might be in an area that isn't quite what you're hoping for. So that's really where we come in. You know, I mean, that's really where we start with folks, is breaking down Portland and the metro area, talking about what different areas are going to be like and what you can get and where. Now, if you are looking at new construction specifically, you know, there's a handful of regions in the Portland metro area where they're building right now, and they're all going to be further out on kind of those more, you know, in some of those more outer lying suburbs that I was talking about. So out in Bethany, you know, way northwest in the metro area, down in Sherwood, southwest in the metro area, Wilsonville all the way south, Happy Valley to the southeast, you know, even some of kind of far west, southwest Beaverton and Hillsborough all the way west. This is where most of the new construction is taking place. And you know, you can get really nice new homes. You can get some really good deals too. I mean, there's a lot of benefit of buying new construction from a builder. Now, there actually are a fair amount of small new developments, you know, going on even in Portland city limits, where you might have, you know, 6 to maybe up to a dozen or 15 homes being built, you know, just kind of in a smaller area. You do see that, and it's not impossible to get new construction in Portland by any means. But if you want a newer community overall that's being developed, that, you know, has a lot of the kind of nicer, newer amenities that you're going to find more in newer communities, like walking trails and green spaces, and overall a little bit more environmentally conscious development in terms of, you know, stormwater runoff and things like that. You know, you can find it in some of those areas where they're building hundreds and hundreds of homes. And then I know for a lot of people too, it's like, you know, you might be moving to Portland for a job specifically. And so if that's the case, you know, looking at where you're going to live in the metro area relative to your commute is super important. I think for some people, you know, they're willing to commute maybe 45 minutes or more to live in the type of home and neighborhood that, you know, they would see themselves living, or, you know, the type of area that they would feel comfortable. And I think a good example of that is that you have so many jobs and, you know, employment opportunities on the west side in Washington County and Beaverton and Hillsborough, you know, Nike and Intel and, you know, dozens and dozens of other really big companies and employers, that pretty good chance, if you were moving here for a job, an area where you very well could end up working. So a lot of people might have a job out west on the west side of the Portland metro area, but want to live, like, say, in southeast or northeast Portland, for example, where you're going to have these really cool old historic neighborhoods, very walkable. You know, you're 5-10 minutes into downtown Portland. You got a lot of really cool neighborhood entertainment districts, you know, right on your doorstep. And so, you know, a lot of people want to live in that type of area, and they're willing to commute, you know, whatever it is, 30-40 minutes, potentially maybe more, with traffic during rush hour, to, you know, to have that balance. Okay, so it's 2025. Things like inflation, cost of living overall, are definitely something that are on a lot of people's radar. And when you look at Portland, not a cheap place to live. You know, there's two ways you can look at it. Portland is the most affordable major city on the West Coast. So if you are coming from elsewhere on the West Coast, Seattle, Bay Area, Southern California, Portland is actually going to seem pretty affordable, especially when you look at housing costs. I think a lot of the other expenses are pretty interchangeable, like groceries, for example, healthcare costs, utilities, basically a wash. And then, there's tax implications too, where Oregon has one of the highest state income taxes of any state in the country. Our property taxes aren't outrageous compared to some other states, but we don't have a sales tax, so depending on your earnings, in terms of income and your spending habits, you might have to look at what you could expect in terms of, say, like a monthly or annual budget. But with that said too, if you're coming from, the Midwest, Texas, a lot of other areas of the country that are, considerably more affordable than Portland and Oregon as a whole, it could be a little bit of a shock. So I think that's really something to look into, is, looking at what you can expect to be spending, not only on housing, whether mortgage or rent, but your other standard fixed expenses as well. And also, how much you might be doing for entertainment, how much you're going out to eat, all that good stuff. Now, if we're looking at the housing market specifically, the last couple of years have been really a complete 180 from what we saw in 2020, 2021 into 2022. Obviously the biggest driver there is interest rates, and interest rates have come down some at times. They are still hovering around 7%. If you're watching this early January 2025, it's really tough to say. And what we need to see is a lot of economic data suggesting that, inflation is coming down, which we have at times. With a new administration coming in too, we also need to see what, things like deficit spending are going to look like. So there's a lot of variables, there's a lot of factors when it comes to what to expect with interest rates specifically. If we were to assume that they're going to stay around 7%, maybe 6.5%, at least moving in, to say the spring and the summer, I think we could expect basically the same market that we've had over the last couple of years, where, inventory has been pretty low, still historically low. It has increased a little bit since rates went up, took a lot of buyers out of the market. So a lot of homes have been sitting on the market longer. So we have a little bit of improved inventory, but not because there's more new listings hitting the market. It's because there are homes that are sitting on the market longer. And because it's become so much more expensive for buyers because of higher interest rates, buyers are being really discerning, really picky. They're being patient and taking their time. So, homes that are really turnkey, in good condition, well priced, in good neighborhoods, on a good street, are typically still going to sell quickly, and it can still be very, very competitive, again, because of that still relatively low inventory. But there are far fewer buyers in the market today than there were a couple of years ago. So in general, we can expect less competition. What this has led to, these conditions that I'm talking about, is just fewer real estate transactions taking place. 2023 was the worst year for real estate transactions, volume of real estate transactions, since 2008. So the housing market itself hasn't crashed, home prices haven't crashed, but market activity has completely taken a nosedive, and there was only a very marginal improvement in 2024. So if the conditions remain the same, we can kind of expect the same thing, where it could be competitive, but it's not nearly going to be as competitive as it was in 2020, 2021, 2022. And there are areas of the country that have completely receded, like 10, 15% from those kind of COVID years, pandemic, low interest rate environment highs with prices. Portland probably saw 5 to 10% drop in prices realistically. You don't necessarily see that on paper, but anecdotally, it is not uncommon for homes to sell, 5+% below the list price, and that's still happening today, again, early 2025. I think some of that value has been recouped, so if you look at the data, Portland's market, or rather home values, home prices, have basically stayed the same. You break it down by suburb, break it down by neighborhood, things like that, you'll see, you know, different fluctuations. But in general, I mean, home prices aren't climbing like crazy, but they really haven't dropped all that much either. Is the housing market going to crash? As long as inventory stays low, it seems that the market has been pretty resilient to high interest rates. So again, prices have stayed relatively strong, even in a higher interest rate environment. You know, the things that would potentially lead to a rapid drop in prices, you know, maybe up to the point of even saying it's a crash, is if we saw interest rates over 8% for a sustained period of time, 8.5%, 9%. I mean, there's a breaking point somewhere, and there's enough economic uncertainty to, you know, to not be able to say that that wouldn't at least be a possibility. But the expectation, you know, most people would say that rates are expected to drop to 6%, 5.5%, maybe 5%, you know, even by the end of this year. The other thing that could happen, the other possibility, would be a major recession where there's tons and tons of layoffs, and, you know, the buying power of buyers gets hit significantly to the point where there's no buyers for homes at their current price level, so home prices would have to come down. I don't think that's the expectation, you know, and we're kind of speaking broadly, you know, in terms of like macro national level economics. You know, there's, you know, more subtle kind of nuanced things as far as evaluating how it, you know, this year could play out in terms of the market in Portland itself specifically. But, you know, I mean, we're still seeing a lot of people relocate to the area. If the level of demand, you know, was relatively flat, and a bunch of people decided to sell their house and inventory went up significantly, we could see a drop in home prices there too. But I think, you know, the assumption, you know, on pretty good grounds, is that there are a lot of people out there just waiting for rates to come down. There's a lot of pent-up demand. There's a lot of people who would love to buy a home, but 7% is just not as appetizing as waiting it out, you know, and maybe getting in at 6%, 5.5%, something like that, which is going to be much more affordable when it comes to a monthly payment. All right, if you're moving to Portland with kids, a big consideration is their education, obviously, and what school district you would want to move into. You have two enormous school districts in the Portland metro area, Portland Public Schools and Beaverton Schools, with a really big range when you look within those districts of schools and ratings of schools. You know, so there's going to be schools that are rated, you know, as good as it gets for the area and for the state, and there's going to be some schools that aren't rated as good. I mean, there's a ton of resources online, Great Schools, niche.com, to look at school ratings, different metrics that they use for those school ratings. You can look at parent reviews, things like that. So, you know, we can't necessarily steer people toward the best school districts or away from the worst school districts, especially. But there's a lot of good resources out there online. And I think there's an opportunity to get into a good situation in terms of an education for your kids just about anywhere you would live in the Portland metro area. I think just broadly, one of the things to know is that, again, there are a couple of really, really big school districts when you look at Beaverton and Portland. And then there are a number, at least half a dozen, of smaller school districts that, you know, really just serve one, maybe a couple of suburbs, like Tigard-Tualatin or Westland, Wilsonville. But Lake Oswego has its own school district, Sherwood, for example. So, you know, you're gonna see varying degrees of size when it comes to different school districts, and that in and of itself might play a part in terms of your consideration. Another thing to know is that, you know, whereas there are a lot of private schools in the metro area, there's not a ton of big private schools. You know, if you compare it to a place like Seattle, where it seems like every other high school in Seattle is a private high school, and a lot of them have, you know, 700, 800, 900, 1,000 kids, there's really only a couple of big private high schools, Central Catholic and Jesuit, and then you have a lot of other high schools and private elementary schools too. But you have like Horizon Christian in Tualatin, you have Westside Christian that's in Tigard, and a number of other private schools, most of them being religiously affiliated, I guess that's a way to say it, which is, I think, pretty typical, pretty common. But there are opportunities for private schools. A lot of them are smaller. not to say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but just something to know. You know, if you're moving here with kids, if you're looking at areas, obviously schools are going to be a big consideration. I tell you what, it's pretty cold up here in the trees right now. I'm trying not to do too much sniffling on you, but a couple more topics here. Entertainment, which is obviously a very broad topic, but what are you going to do for fun? What are going to be some of the things that you get out and do? And you know, I think just based on coming from one area to another, that's going to have to change and evolve a little bit based on what's available here relative to where you're coming from. But Portland, you know, this region, pretty chill, laid back place. Obviously food, craft breweries, wineries, distilleries, coffee, you know, very popular things to do just in general. You know, things like art and live music and kind of more cultural elements, you know, live plays, things like that. There's a lot to do, obviously more toward the urban center. There's going to be more opportunities for that kind of stuff. When you get out into the suburbs, it's kind of just like any suburb USA for the most part. Strip malls, and there's a lot that's been, you know, tastefully done, and there's really a lot that you can do out in the suburbs. A lot of great restaurants still, breweries, things like that. But I think out in the suburbs, you get more of a true urban experience. In the city, you get more of kind of that urban experience as far as, again, just more culture, more character, just more to do and see overall. So, you know, if you lived in the suburbs, again, like we've talked about, you can get into Portland pretty quickly and pretty easily. So there is an opportunity to kind of have best of both worlds there. I would imagine if you're moving to Portland and you want to live in the city, you're probably not going out to the suburbs all that much. There's not going to be too much that draws you out to the suburbs necessarily. Probably the biggest universal thing, you know, is all of the green space, natural beauty, all the opportunities to get outside and enjoy nature. You know, like where I am today in Forest Park. You know, Forest Park, you know, there's a few other parks like this, not nearly this size, but, you know, wooded areas with hiking trails where you can go walk around. So whether that be Tryon Creek or whether that be Mount Tabor or in Portland or, you know, all throughout the Portland metro area and suburbs, there's all kinds of areas like this to get out and walk around. And a lot of great parks too. So whether that is Portland or the suburbs, you're gonna have a lot of really good parks, more like, you know, playgrounds and sports fields and things like that. There is a ton of opportunity to get outside. Obviously you're up against the weather a little bit here, but you know, it's about 45 degrees, but it's early January. I mean, there's barely a cloud in the sky, so this is not a typical winter day by any means, but you still get plenty of this throughout some of the colder months. So, you know, it's not completely dreary and desolate for 6 months and then, you know, bright, sunny, and happy for the other 6. You do get a little bit of a mix. I mean, even in summer, you can get, you know, kind of some pretty crummy days. So either way, you know, if it's like you want to get out and hit the town, do some of that stuff, more social stuff, if you want to get outside, if you want to enjoy nature, plenty to do in terms of entertainment. That dynamic's going to look a little bit different depending on where you live in Portland for sure. But overall, there's definitely going to be something for everybody. Okay, last topic. If you're moving to Portland, Oregon in 2025, I want to talk a little bit about politically motivated migration, which is something that we've seen a ton of in the past several years. Whether it's from red states to blue states or blue states to red states. And so obviously being here in Portland, we've had a lot of people from like Idaho, Texas, even Arizona that have moved here for politically motivated reasons. You know, they want to be around more like-minded people or whatever it is. Similarly, we've had a lot of people leave the state to like Texas and Idaho, for example. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see if this kind of politically motivated migration continues as a trend. I would anticipate it will, and maybe it's something that has always happened, but it, you know, definitely seemed to be kind of amplified over the past few years. I think, you know, something to consider, you know, a question for yourself, if you kind of fall into that category, is it truly going to be different? Obviously, you look at like, you know, how people vote, generally what the culture is like, what the state laws and rules are, and what the you know, priorities seem to be when you look at like local city-state governments, for example. You know, I think there too, it kind of depends on where you live in Portland, how different of an experience you're actually going to get. Probably goes without saying, but if you're living in Portland proper, if you're living, you know, in the city, or let's just say the closer you get to the city, the more you're going to get of maybe the experience that you're envisioning as far as kind of the stereotypical Portland culture, you know, or how people act and think and everything. Believe it or not, there is a diversity of thought, even right in the heart of the city. Not everybody thinks, you know, or acts exactly the same. So, you know, that's probably goes without saying. But on the flip side of that, you know, if you're moving to Portland for politically motivated reasons and you have your eyes on the suburbs, you might have a different experience than you're envisioning, potentially. Maybe generally, as a rule of thumb, the closer you get to Portland, the closer you get to the city, the more it's going to, you know, lean cohesively in one direction. But, you know, like I was saying earlier, it's like if you live in the suburbs in the Portland metro area, you kind of could be anywhere. I mean, you know, the landscape is unique, and, you know, you still get some of like the cultural aspects of this part of the country, craft beer, stuff like that. But for the most part, you know, people are going to be, if anything, a little bit maybe more moderate or disinterested in the political aspect of things. And maybe that's what you're looking for too, in and of itself. But if you're continuing to move away from the city, you might find that things lean a little more in the opposite direction, you know, and that includes some of these outer-lying suburbs. You know, and it doesn't take long in these outer-lying suburbs to get into, you know, pretty rural areas where it's a different way of life, in some ways maybe a different way of thinking. You know, I like to believe that, you know, most people at the end of the day are similar enough to where people can get along and live amongst each other. But again, you know, you could be even 12, 15 miles away from Portland, and, you know, it doesn't really feel like you're in the Portland that you have in your mind. So maybe a lot of that is obvious, maybe it goes without saying, but this trend of people relocating for politically motivated reasons, I figured it's been so prevalent enough to at least address. And if that is kind of speaking to at least part of the reason why you're thinking about moving to the area, you know, I just don't want anybody to get caught off guard. I want to make sure you're getting into a situation where it's kind of fitting what you're envisioning. And if that's you, you don't want to necessarily get caught in the wrong area. And if you're thinking about moving to Portland, the metro area, for any reason, politically motivated or otherwise, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. Schedule a Zoom call with us. We can talk about all of this stuff. We can talk about your home search. We can talk about neighborhoods, your budget, your price range, talk about a game plan, and get you set up for your move to Portland in 2025. If this video was helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching, and until next time, we'll talk to you later.